Anthony, welcome to Product Growth Stories. I am so happy to have you on the show. You have an amazing career. You've been at so many different amazing companies, JetBlue, Accenture, Electronic Arts, and now you're the CRO at Mabel. And I'd love to talk to you about what really matters in B2B sales and marketing in 2025. So can we just maybe start off with what attracted you to Mabel in the first place?
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me first, JM. And it's great to see it. Mabel's, we've been having a lot of fun. It was just 2 years for me in February. And there were a couple of things about Mabel that really were interesting to me. Number one, when I think about markets, I think about recycled budget money as well as transformative and disruptive money. So recycled, there's an existing process and you're able to do it a lot better, either faster, maybe cheaper, but just a better way. So there's an existing budget there. Take advantage of that. We're in a space for automated testing. Testing's been around for a while. It's continuing to progress and accelerate in its needs, especially with Gen AI coming into development life cycles. But so you've got this recycled budget money component, and you've got a transformative or disruptive. And that I think about that as solving a similar problem, but in a completely disruptive way. And we were leveraging AI before it was really popular multiple years ago. We founded the company. But now you say applying Gen AI to a process that's defined and driving improvements from 50, 70, 80+% because you're doing it in a disruptive way. And the way we approach it from a whole framework of doing all types of testing and able to address what we call this quality gap. So you take those two elements together and you have a really significant TAM. And that was one of the things that was really attractive to me about Mabel, in addition to the culture and the people. And JM, you mentioned, I've been doing this for a while. I got called old the other day in a QBR, which wasn't very nice, but maybe quite true. But when you go, you're doing
People
this.
People started calling me sir too. It's terrible.
Right?
It's not good.
When you have a company, it's like, what do you need to do? What can you bring in? How does it fit? And the fit from the outside was great. And 2 years in, and that's been validated every day. So we're having a lot of fun.
Excellent. And I want to just double click on something you said. You talked about disruptive money versus processes that already are ongoing. When you said that, are you describing it like from potential customers' point of view? Like they have money already ongoing servicing a problem, and also they're willing to invest more into new ways?
Yeah, exactly. So if you think years ago, testing was software development lifecycle, SDLC, and then you move into more of a microservices, and you move into Agile, DevOps, and then into Gen AI components in the actual code creation, right? All of the need for testing, people have been spending money on testing for open source or for outsourced approaches or other products. And a lot of those were designed for the old architectures, clients created types of environments. And now you have this cloud native, both application environments and operating systems. So when you have those older technologies, older approaches, the money's being spent there, the budget's being spent there. So that's where you've got a recycled budget money. It's already defined components. So for us, it plays very well. And we're actually, in many cases, able to reduce what the budget might have been. We built out all kinds of ROI models. And that's always a fun thing for me. I built out one yesterday. I had to double click on the math. The ROI was like 95%. Which I'm like, and we had actually proven that this was actual work we had done with the customer and across all these different metrics. And it's almost like, so that kind of recycle, when you can improve something in those upper 50+% ranges, that gives a great opportunity. And then a lot of companies today, I'm sure you've heard this from other folks, but having AI, different projects. I was at Acera before, and it was Gen AI we were there Gen AI before it really was becoming so prevalent. And there was a huge kind of consideration for companies. Are we ready to adopt this? And then all of a sudden, fast forward, it's like, how many Gen AI related projects are actually undergoing it? All of your vendors need to have this in their offering. So at Mabel, we were doing it before there was Gen AI. We built in additional components, and throughout the entire cycle of creation, maintenance, execution, analyzing on tests. I'm talking a lot about Mabel, but
yeah, and AI is I feel like it's the theme of my life now for all of us. Feels much like more disruptive than other things that everyone, at least we've experienced, like the .com, things becoming Web 2.0. It seems so much bigger than that. And How do you think this is changing how sales motions work?
Yeah, it's a good question. If you take a little bit of a step back, I think you're familiar with the concept of Moore's Law, right? We were actually
Yeah.
talking about this internally on
He had only
right?
4 data points in that original paper, by the way.
Yeah,
So.
the piece of compute going every 18 months, so effectively colloquial terms. But today there is no Moore's Law concept. That's in days and hours, right? The innovation that's occurring with the innovation is so rapid, unlike I think anything else we've ever seen. So then how does that apply to customer buying cycles? So I think that's one thing, right? Acceleration of technology innovation, number one. Number two, consumerization of technology. So taking a step back, years ago, perpetual model, companies would buy it, they'd amortize it, appreciate it 3 to 5 years, maybe 7 in some cases, but they're buying a perpetual piece of software and their vision is, we're going to use this for a longer period of time.
And in that era, if software was very similar to other capital equipment, it's like we're buying this huge machine, okay, 5 years, that's almost the same thinking.
Exactly. And then you go into the subscription environment, and the subscription environment says you're renting it, and there's a different mindset that goes with renting. And then because of innovation, vendor innovation is happening very quickly. So now you've got a different accounting treatment of it as an expense line most often on a SaaS product versus something you carry on the balance sheet to depreciate. So then you've got this rapid innovation in the technology and this mindset that creates an environment where customers are thinking, okay, I may start really small and try this for a limited period of time. So that's created a couple things from the buyer perspective. One, increased competition because you've got increased adoption, increased innovation. Number two, it creates a different mindset of trial, extended trial or more detailed trial, and kind of as opposed to a big enterprise. We're buying enterprise immediately now for 3 to 5 years. It also creates a fungibility concept to say if one thing doesn't work, I can swap out another. So there's a different buying process overall, I think, in SaaS that this may have been covered before, but from my perspective, at least, it's changed the way they engage. And then you overlay what's happened in the past 6 months from macroeconomic situation. And that puts a situation where
it's really fun right now. Trying to sell expensive things is a little harder.
Yeah, it's a little different, right? But at the end of the day, people are still funding things. So if it's good funds, you have 40 potential projects, gets to the CFO, hey, if times are really good, we'll fund 25. Times are a little bit compressed, they go to 20. Times are a little bit more compressed, and now there's uncertainty in the market. Maybe they're going to fund 10. So the reality is there's still things that are getting funded, but the delta between getting funded in that top 10 list for falling on 11, 12, or somewhere in the 20s is very significant. It's significant in terms of the impact of the business, but where you fall is very fine line based on the effort and execution that you've had in the field. So that, to your original question, you think about what's different today about engaging with customers. And I'll share a couple different thoughts for you if you want to hear these, Jay. So number one, I think it's really incumbent that people in the go-to-market teams are able to articulate in good detail customer examples. Why? They're real. They're irrefutable. It's an easy way to get credibility. And you have to think too, in a customer environment, because of ability to do research on their own, because of the innovation that we already talked about, customers are very well educated. Beautiful. That's a great thing. But they very often will have a lot greater domain expertise than the people that they're talking to from the vendor side. So you're selling into a certain function. Someone's in development. They've been there for many years. They're in quality. They've been there for many years. They're in operations. They've been DevOps. They've been there for many years. And earlier in career people, like you've only been working for 3-4 years, right? So you can't match years of experience. However, if you have, number one, really good customer examples, it's a great way to establish credibility. And that, along the lines of the mindset of trying things, thinking of it as a rental, there's also an enhanced and accelerated buying process and a way of determining whether it's worth your time, the opportunity cost consideration with customer side. And you have to establish that credibility really quickly the first meeting. So
you're describing it in salesperson terms. And I think these are the same things that marketers are trying to do. It's the same. It's like the exact same thing, just a different scenario, right? We're always looking for how can we just demonstrate concrete, tangible proof that this did happen? And it's the same. You can't beat a testimonial or a customer who they can relate to describing that.
Yeah. And I think the other component that relates to, if you have a good customer example, then that gives you an ability to have a legitimate conversation. So it's not customer vendor. You're talking about some real things together. It's relevant for them. The second thing is really trying to build up your product knowledge and domain knowledge as quickly as you can as a go-to-market person. Because if the customer says, hey, that's a great metric, do you have a unique functionalities that are enabling that? You have to be able to articulate what they are. And it might not even be that all the 10 or 12 different alternatives in the market. But if you can highlight some of the things that make your product really unique, then great, that moves you to a good situation. And I think the third thing I'll mention that's really, really important today based on the macro situation is anticipating what the customer's buying process is going to be and being able to create an environment in which you can have a really good dialogue about that. So meaning if a customer bought a product 6 months ago, their financial approval process today is going to be different. There are going to be more people involved. It's probably going to go to the CFO or the CEO. That's who we use, the economic buyer, personal discretionary use of funds. But the customer may not know that. They may not be aware of that process. They may not be aware of that level
of their own process, you mean?
Of their own process, yeah. So I think it's really incumbent upon go-to-market people today to be able to share with the customer what we're seeing in other customers and give them perspective, real examples about how things get done. And then be able to say, we're going to guide you through that process with your ROI, with the documentation, with the solution briefing, with the story that you need, so you can prepare for your CFO. Because when your CFO is looking again back at that 10 things, you have to have a really good story that's going to resonate. So
I've definitely personally experienced that when I'm talking to someone like, how do I buy a thing? What do we do now? I've never done this. Yeah. And I imagine, if there's a ton of people just like that.
Yeah. And the process is largely the same in that you have to have a champion. There's going to be an economic buyer. You may need to have multiple technical champions, multiple political champions. And there needs to be a really defined problem statement. That's the way we think about it. A really nice solution definition and requirements that are going to match really well. And an ROI tied to that very specific problem statement. And if you have that together, that becomes a really fundable case that people are saying, yes, we've proven this, we've tested it. It makes a lot of sense for us. And, that puts you in the best spot to be able to operate and have good success, regardless of whatever else is happening.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. In the end of the day, business decisions and selling B2B is way different from selling to earlier stage. Like earlier stage business selling is very similar to selling to consumers, but it's much colder, right? It's just, you have to be able to prove that it's going to make money and the risk is somehow covered. Yeah.
And you have to, you mentioned risk too, Jan. So in customer buying processes, and there's been some analysis on this, CEB used to do it years ago before they got bought by Gartner. When you think of the whole cycle, it's really about problem identification, solution definition, and then vendor selection. And throughout that process, the requirements are very often, the functionality is very often the most important thing early, but late, especially in a macroeconomic climate that's a little bit more tenuous, the risk becomes a huge factor. So even starting back to the first point, starting with customer examples is giving a customer a level of confidence that this is not just about the technology. This is about the impact that the technology is ultimately going to bring. So if you start with those later in the cycle, you're bringing out, here's how we're going to help you adopt and implement in a really great fashion. Here's other examples. Here's your specific plan. That risk element is reduced from early on. And then later in the cycle, it becomes something that either is already been addressed, or if it needs to be addressed, you can address it very quickly. Because otherwise, when you're in that, we'll see another week, we got to go back to the CFO, we got to go back. Time kills deals, right?
It does, yeah. Yeah. And somehow this part of sales, it reminds me of starting anything. If you have any project, even if it's internal, often what happens is people think about this large outcome and it's too big. And so we really have to get there, but man, that's a huge project. And part of a great leader can find ways to, how can we just see if we can get a little bit closer without making this enormous dependency tree and making like a huge initiative for the whole company. And I feel like sales can be very similar. If you can find a different way to structure, let's have a lower risk way to see to get some results actually happening.
Absolutely. Yeah. I was talking with one of my folks today where he runs one of his functions. He runs our partner business, and we're having some great success with partners across a bunch of different areas. But we were talking about at the end of the year, where do we want to be? And here's where we can see where we want to go, where we want to be. But let's deconstruct what that means for leading indicators and what the lagging indicators are going to be quarter by quarter. And
my favorite words.
Relate, right? So if you take that big chunk, that where we want to ultimately go, but then you deconstruct it and break it into time, and you break it into what good looks like across, and you just focus on those. And that's a great way. And we take a similar approach in adoption as well, looking at those early indicators and making sure we're on track. We accelerate. If we're off track, we call it out, and we work with the customer directly on them too. So I think if you piece it out, there's a whole other element too. I think that in the environment today has come even to more into play, which is funny too, but it's what's old sometimes becomes new. I think there's a significant opportunity and need to do more old school project planning, especially when you've got technologies that are very easy to use, being very specific on what good looks like when, what the work breakdown structure is, and who's accountable, and what those early signs are, and what the dependencies are, and what the critical paths. Like I was in project management 20 some years ago and project management technology. And that's become, I think, even more of an opportunity in companies who could do that. Their GR and their NDR will show it.
Yeah. Yeah. And taking that into the sales context, it makes me think of a confused mind doesn't buy. And it's a great way to show like, here's what to expect. There's not a huge, now what's going to happen. It's like, we've planned it out. Here's exactly when you're going to know how we are on track. One thing I wanted to ask you about is I think you have this notorious idea that you're anti-discovery call.
Yeah, you heard about that, huh? Yeah, you want me to give you a little background? You think about this, right? You think about a customer buying process, and you think about maybe a customer who has a first meeting and they've got some interest in, maybe they say, hey, I want to do a demo, or I want to learn about your technology, or I want to get educated. If a customer walks into that meeting, say that meeting is 30 minutes, and if the approach is, I'm going to do discovery on you for 30 minutes, it's very difficult to get 15 minutes in and the customer saying, wow, I'm loving these questions. Keep going. You go from, okay, let me answer that. And there's a 3-minute answer to a 2-minute answer to a 1-minute answer to fast forward a couple more questions. You got 1-minute answers. And they said, oh, I'm getting called into a meeting 10 minutes early. You think about that impact. If you're making that first meeting all about what you need as a vendor, what's the impact of that? What's the customer walking away from that meeting saying? Hey, best case scenario, the vendor came in, they asked me a bunch of questions.
Hope it works.
Lunch,
Hope
right?
this turns out.
They're like, hey, you met with that vendor today. What'd you think? They asked me a bunch of questions. They seem knowledgeable, but I don't know. We'll see. I'm going to do a demo next week. That's the best case scenario. But more often scenario is, that was a shitty meeting. It was a waste of my time. They asked me a bunch of questions, 60, 70% of them they probably could have found out by doing a lot of good research on me. And I may take that meeting, or I may just cancel it that second, maybe to do the demo. So the point is not doing that discovery because it's critical, but the point is making sure you're driving in that first meeting with what we call compelled energy, so that the customer can walk out of that meeting saying, this was a really valuable use of my time because they share with me a problem statement that's potential for me. They share with me a value hypothesis on what they think they can do. They did some research. Some of the things they were on, some of the things they were off. They gave me some good context in this. They defined what a path would be. I already know a little bit about the product. If this thing does what I think it does, they're really well aligned on the problem. Functionally, technically, it'd be good. And we got to go validate this. This seems like it's worth my time. It seems like these guys are well aligned. They have a good approach. So and if you can build, the whole idea is that you're identifying a champion, then you're building that champion. When you got to be in a situation in which you have a real tested champion, the discovery dialogue is unfettered. You can have as much conversation as you need. You could do as much prep as you need. You can get as many details because you think about it. The definition of a champion is a person who has political respect and or technical authority who fights for you when you're not there. And if you think the concept of fighting, and we use the word fight, it's an old word from McMahon, from where we had it early days where we were learning this there, and medic and things. But this definition is really critical for me and for any of my organizations because it's champion-based selling. But when you have someone who's ready to fight, that means as the person who's in their corner, you're preparing them for anticipating objections. You're preparing them for conversations they're going to have. You're preparing them with the ROI. You're preparing them with competitive alternatives. You're preparing them with other people in the organization who may agree with them, and then they can bring them in, or maybe you have a different alternative approach. But that all, in order to do that preparation, that's all good dialogue. So it's not about not doing discovery. It's about thinking about discovery as an ongoing dialogue. But the critical component is establishing the champion relationship first. Then you have tons of opportunity to do as much discovery, and it will continue throughout the entire cycle. If your focus is discovery first, your ability to build that champion is very strained, especially when you go back to what I was saying on that consumerization, the buying process. They don't have the time to spend 3 hours with you before they determine if the product is valuable. It has to be done really quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, it's making me think about my own discovery process. Could probably use a polish, but about how there's other ways to provide value in your area of expertise that are around the problem that aren't necessarily around asking questions, right? There's things that you can give them they didn't know. They're going to help them evaluate that whole area of the problem space, not just, okay, let me fill out my entire sheet. I'll come back with the ROI calculator.
Exactly. Yeah. That's where I think, and even for me, when I'm looking at investigating technologies, if someone comes to me and they've done some research, they have some semblance, they say, hey, I've got some identification of what I think you guys might be going through. It's much easier to edit it and correct it and say, okay, pretty good, but let me line you up a little bit better. So much better of a quality conversation as opposed to, if you had a magic wand, what keeps you up at night? And if people ask those questions, like, that's not a good conversation that they're going to have with me afterwards. Not because you don't want to be inquisitive, but because it's a very lazy way of engaging with it.
Makes a lot of sense. Sense. As we wrap up, what is your best piece of advice that you wish the other CROs, other revenue leaders knew for 2025, for success in 2025? What do they need to know?
I think the biggest thing is two things. One, being aware of what your customer environment is. So what market are they in? How are they affected by whatever's happening in the economy? And being empathetic to that and planning for that. And the second thing is creating an environment in which you can collaborate on what their process will be. So we have a sales process, and we're very transparent with that sales process and steps in it, and being able to say, hey, here's how we typically go. You might want to go a different, adjust a little bit, beautiful, but building that level of engagement and alignment on the right way to move through the process. I think those are the two big things. Empathizing with where the customer is and creating an environment to talk about what the process would be for them moving forward with the technology, how they evaluate, how their CFO is going to engage, what that ROI might be. And don't be lazy. Like we created an ROI model. We created 5 or 6 different versions. I wrote one the other night for a specific customer, and I'll write probably 3 more in the next 2 weeks. But that's important. When you do that, then it puts forth the effort. And I think that's really important today, to not speak in your terms, but understand what the customer terms are.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much, Anthony. Great episode. Nice to have you on. Where should we send people that want to get a hold of you or are interested in AI native test automation?
Yeah, thanks for offering, Jay. Anthony at Mabel works really well, and I'm on LinkedIn. So
great. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me, buddy.